welcome to today's program. I'm so glad you've joined us. You know, our quality of life can really suffer simply because of the way we see ourselves. My guest today, Dr. Mintle, is a nationally renowned clinical psychologist who says, get off the scales and get on with your life. We're talking about body image. Right. Dr. Mintle, thank you for being with us today.
It's great to be here with you.
We had a good time yesterday, and then you and I, in our private conversation, talked about some of the things that maybe we still needed to talk about, and one of them is how can a Christian, knowing that humility is the cardinal virtue that we need to seek, because even Jesus, humble, we're supposed to be like him, take on his humility. How can we feel good about ourselves, like the way we look, and yet not get into a spirit of pride? I think that that's a real concern for a lot of people. So
it is, and I confused those two things, I have to say, in my own Christian walk, and I thought that if I liked the way I looked, then somehow I was acting in a prideful way, and I was actually given that message by several Christian people in my life that no, you can't, sort of the old just as a worm as I, I have to kind of be down there and feeling bad about who I am, or somehow I'm not humble, but we confuse that, and I think there's a fine line, there's a balance, and the Christian life is really a lot about balance in life. And so God wants us. He wants us to feel good about what he designed so that we can get off of that stuff and get on with what he has for us to do. And if we don't walk in the confidence of God, and we're constantly struggling in the area, thinking about that, not knowing what we're, really feel about this, then we can't do the things that he wants us to do. So I think there's this fine line of you're humble because you know it's all about God, but you're accepting who you are because of the way God made you.
It's kind of like taking compliments. We were talking about that a little bit, and so many people don't know how to compliment, and they almost, oh no, it's not me, it's God, it's God, it's God.
Yeah.
And we want to give the glory to God.
We do.
But even if you go too far with that, it makes the person trying to give you the compliment feel uncomfortable. And what I have heard, I heard one great woman of God say is that I just take all the compliments that I get all day long and I make a bouquet of flowers out of them, and at the end of the day I offer them to God.
Oh, that's great. Because then you're not allowing that to become something that you up.
Right.
And that's the issue. It's not the receiving of the compliments, because you're cooperating with God and the skills and the gifts and the talents that he's given you. You're cooperating by using those things for the fullness of whatever he's calling you to do. But the question, I think, at the end of the day, and that's what this lady is saying, is that if you don't use that to elevate and you start thinking, it's like believing your own press, as they say. Yeah, look at me. When people start doing that, then it does become a pride issue. And we have to be careful about that.
Well, as a mother who's raised 4 children, I watched, different ones of my children battle through problems of insecurity. And it just seems like really that's something that the devil manages to attack everybody with in some way.
It does. Shape
or form. A couple of my kids had a worse case of it than others, but I know when I would hear them say negative things about themselves, it would just grieve me. It's like, stop talking like that about yourself, or, don't feel that way about yourself. And if you think about, our love, which is so imperfect compared to God's love, imagine how he feels when he's created us and loves us so much. If we say negative, downgrading things about ourselves and feel that way about ourselves, I mean, I think even if you don't want to do it for yourself, you need to do it for God. I mean,
it's a good motivator.
Jesus died for us,
right? And
he feels that we're worth all the sacrifice that he went through. So we really need to get off this. I'm nothing, I'm nobody, I hate myself. All of that's true unless we're in Christ.
Right. Right. And what do you do as a parent? You correct your child.
Yeah, don't
when
talk
your child
like that
does
right
that,
now.
say give me something that's positive about who you are. Focus on the parts of you that you do like, and start to think of yourself in a better light. And that's exactly what God is saying to us in the think on things that are good. Think of things that are lovely, praiseworthy. What is it about you, how I've made you, that's good? Don't take these little pieces. That's what the culture does, is it divides us into parts. I like to tell people we're not a chicken, we're not a leg, we're not a breast, We're parts, we're these parts. We have to look at ourselves much more holistic, but the culture likes to take us piece by piece, part by part, go through our anatomy and tell us what's wrong with every piece of us. And it's the message in the culture is that you're broken and you need to be fixed, and you need to be improved. And again, I say to people, the only person who has the broken body was Jesus.
Right.
And he provided all the fix that we need. in terms of his body being broken. We're not broken. We might need to work on it things. We might need to exercise more, eat better, do the things, get sleep, the things that we know to do. But we're certainly not broken. But that's the message in our culture, is improve, improve. You can always look better. And again, I think that's a distraction from the things of God to keep us in
what
that.
happens, Linda, if somebody just fixates on this one thing that's wrong with them?
There actually is a psychiatric condition when that happens, where you find a flaw in your body. It's usually something on your face. It could be your ears, your nose, some body part that you just think is horrible. And you fixated on it to the point where you can't do your job. You can't have good relationships because you're always talking about how bad you look. I've worked with young women and men who might wear a hat to work every day because they don't want people to see their ears, because that's the part of their body they're so fixated on. And it becomes so obsessing that it actually becomes this thing called body dysmorphic disorder. And that's what it is. It's a fixation on a belief that you're somehow flawed, and that flaw is taking over everything in your life. With men, we have this thing now called muscle dysmorphic disorder. And it's a belief that men have because of all the buffed out magazines that are out there, the fitness magazines that men are, supposed to look good. And you know what? It's interesting. The research shows it's not just looking at women. The research shows that women want men to have a V shape with the broad shoulders and the waist, that women want men to be tall. So this isn't just men's imagination at times. This is really based on the way we try to make men look as well. But this muscle dysmorphic disorder is when they believe that even though their muscles are normal size, they believe that somehow their muscles are inadequate and they're too small and they don't measure up to what they think the cultural ideal is supposed to be.
You know what's really funny, and I mean, you probably already know this, but maybe a lot of people don't. There was actually a time in society, especially I think like in the Victorian society back in the English days, when men with muscles were considered gross.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
And they did everything to have no muscle.
Right, right. And then the women were very voluptuous.
And the women were,
Bring those days back. I do much better, yes.
You know, how much is cultural.
It's changed.
And how culture always seems to have a tendency to take you into excess.
Yes.
One way or the other.
Yes.
Where the Bible says, be well balanced. For your adversary, the devil, roams about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour.
And the message, I think, to teenagers, which really concerns me these days, when they poll teenagers and they ask them, who are your heroes? Who are the models? Who do you want to look like? Very disturbingly, one of the #1 people came up was Pamela Anderson. And there's this belief among teenagers that if you don't have big breasts, you can't be successful in life. That's a cultural belief. And so we've got record rates of teenage girls doing breast implants, which is scary because your breast isn't even fully developed in your teenage years, and it takes many more years for that to even fully develop. So what's the message to the kids? We've got parents who for their 16th birthdays are giving them breast implant surgery so that they can feel better about themselves. And I just, I get grieved when I see that, because I think that fixing the outside or making yourself look a certain way, that the culture, it's like with lips. Now big lips are in, so now we got to have these injections. Or the one that really floored me, I have to tell you, when I was writing the chapter on derrieres, I watched a butt implant operation. And I mean, all my life I've hoped it would be smaller, not bigger.
I haven't been able to figure that one out either. I'm
but there it is, and because it's in these days, so women are actually having pieces of silicone implanted in their derrieres to look bigger. So you think about the craziness of what we're doing in terms of trying to match some ideal that, like you said, it could change in the next 10 years. Then, thin lips could be in, and then you've got these thick lips all of a sudden. What are you going to do with them?
And
so
I don't want to give anybody watching the idea that we think it's wrong or sinful to have cosmetic surgery
and I don't
or
either.
to
I
do
don't
things,
take that position.
To help yourself.
Right.
I mean, I've had some work done on my face.
Right.
But it is wrong if you take it to extreme and you fixate on it, and that's all you think about, and you're doing it when there's really no reason to do it, and you're doing it way too young or way too much. And so once again, everything has to be in balance.
And the motivation of your heart. And I think that's really the difference. If you're doing some cosmetic procedure because you're on television or you're doing something to improve and feel a little bit better, That's different than if it's like, I have to have this, or I'm not going to be a good enough
Or I'm
person.
not worth anything.
Right,
Yeah,
and it's
exactly.
motivated by the wrong things, or this is the way I'm going to get my self-esteem improved.
That's
Is by
exactly
doing
right.
something to my face. That's not going to get your self-esteem.
Matter of fact, I would venture to say that if a person has to do that to feel good about themselves, then they shouldn't, because their
That's right.
motivation is all wrong.
And that's what we tell people. We also tell people that if you're trying to get some control over your life, and this is a big one that I see with men and women, that if things are out of control in their life, maybe they're being abused, or maybe they're in a horrible marriage, or maybe they're having, a negative person in their life that they can't get out of, their boss is driving them crazy. A lot of times when we can't control those things, because those involve other people, we can't control it. We take the control out on our body, and we shift and we go,
Right.
I can't control them, but I can control my body. So I'm going to just keep focusing my efforts, on what I can control. I tell people it's easier to fix a hairstyle than it is to fix a relationship with your mother-in-law.
Yeah.
So we focus on the things that are easier, and we go, oh, I can control that. And really, that can become the beginnings for some people of even an eating disorder.
Yes, I mean, that is the root of most eating
It is.
disorders, I think. Welcome back. Lisa Baker did not think that her life would amount to much. She was teased about her body from early childhood. It took divine intervention to turn her life around.
I was miserable. I was not happy. And there was a lot of good things going on in my life, but I just couldn't see it because I was so focused on the thing that I truly desired, was that approval, saying I was okay, that I was pretty, that I was accepted for me.
Lisa Baker grew up in a caring family and was praised from an early age for her vocal talent. But her self-confidence was shattered when she became a target of excessive ridicule from classmates about her appearance.
I felt humiliated. I felt embarrassed about my body shape. I felt really just devastated. So as a result, it was just something I carried with me throughout my teenage years. I began to compare myself with my peers and those who seemed to be the ideal. It would lead to jealousy. It led to being envy, even though nobody knew it out on the outside. But a lot of times, it was just a continual war on the inside.
She was convinced no one would like her until she lost weight. But when she slimmed down in college and finally achieved her ideal figure, Lisa didn't find the happiness she craved.
As I did lose the weight, I still was the same person on the inside, even though I changed on the outside. But I knew that things had to change on the inside, and that was only through God's help, through renewing my mind, seeing myself as He sees me.
As her relationship with the Lord matured, Lisa gained the freedom and confidence to enjoy new activities and live the life God intended her to have.
When I met my husband, Chris, that was an interesting time for me because those flaws that I thought that I had were actually things that he really liked about me.
I knew she was pretty, and I would say it to her, but I could tell that she didn't quite believe that. She wasn't confident in herself. But now I can see that, because we've spent time together encouraging one another. She encourages me back now, and we spend a lot of time together running. And I wouldn't be doing doing running if it wasn't for her.
I've always had a desire to do something athletic. And as I started stepping out, doing running, that was something I had never done before. I began to find that I really liked it, and I really liked the challenge, and therefore it led into doing marathons. I feel I'm enjoying my life more because I'm not afraid to take a risk, and I always find out something about myself that I never thought was even there. So it's been awesome.
Well, it's amazing, isn't it, Linda, how young people are when the enemy begins to torment them, and how teasing and just saying one unkind thing to a person, how it can affect their life.
I think it speaks to the power of the tongue, which is scriptural again, in terms of bringing life and death. And I've had people in therapy where they've had one comment said to them that was just dramatic in their, it just somehow it stuck. And 30 years later, they're still talking about when that person said that particular thing to me. And in some ways, you're just amazed. But I guess it does speak to the power of our words. And people don't always think about that. I think family members don't always think about that. You see a lot of dads who just, are sitting on the couch and they may say, hey, Jello thighs, or, they just make a comment, thunder thighs, or something about their kids. And they don't really mean it. When you get them all together, they say, I didn't really mean to be cruel, but my tongue, I just didn't have control, and I just said something out of my mouth, and that thing really, really stuck with their kids. So we have to be very careful with our speech.
Well, some people, because of just their personalities, they do have a tendency to be more fun-loving and, want to tease. But we have to be very careful that our teasing is not downgrading.
Right.
Or that it's not based around someone's weakness.
Right.
And, then there's other people who tease excessively, and it's based out of their own insecurities.
Yeah.
It's like if they can put somebody else down,
they feel better.
Then they feel better about themselves. So really, have you found in your practice in dealing with people that we really need to be kind of careful about the whole teasing thing?
Yeah, and I think, not being so loose-tongued and thinking about the sensitivity of different people, and something that you and I might think is funny, somebody else might not think is funny. So again, it's kind of knowing the person, knowing what they can handle, and then always being careful that you're not really offending somebody, because you really don't know where there was a wound in that area. You don't know. You might think of something as just kind of innocuous, just a comment that you make, and yet that person may really have had a wounded issue there that you weren't aware of. So we don't always know. So I think it's just wise to be fun-loving. Like you say, take the personal stuff out, maybe just make general jokes and just have a good time, but not be doing things that are very personal to people that could be a problem.
Well, certainly God would never prompt us to tease in a downgrading way, because he tells us to do everything with edification and exhortation, and our whole goal should be to build each other up. Right. So do you feel like that there's a lot of pressure today on teenagers in particular with this area of self-image?
I think it's huge, and we're seeing the results of that with rising numbers of eating disorders, rising numbers of this thing we talked about called body dysmorphic disorder. I mean, we're just seeing record rates of these things. We're seeing kids as young as 7 now being treated for eating disorders and body image problems. I remember when my daughter was 5, she was in kindergarten. She came home one day from kindergarten, and she said, that they wouldn't play with this one girl because she was fat. And I was saying, you mean they were making decisions about who to play with based on their body type? And she said, yeah. I said, well, honey, what did you do? And she goes, well, I just walked over and I said, we're playing with this girl because my mom works with fat people and they don't like to be made fun of. And I thought, when a 5-year-old's mind, good for her that she stood up for her friend, and she refused to be played with unless they would play with this girl. But as young as 5, it just taught me. And then we've got, on the other end of the spectrum, we've got women in midlife now for the first time ever developing eating disorders. And it has a lot to do with women going into aging and going through menopause and middle aging and starting to feel like they're not good enough. It's like a reversed puberty is what we're seeing, where women are losing their sense of vitality because the culture is so focused on youth and thinness and beauty that as you age, what's normal? I mean, I'm driving my car and my daughter goes, Mom, what's this? And I said, well, plastic surgeons would call that bat wing deformity. Which makes it sound like it's some kind of disease, but it's the normal process of aging. I go into the gym, I work out, but there's a certain amount of my skin as I age that's going to lose its elasticity. This is what happens. The collagen, the skin, the connective tissue loses its elasticity, and we don't look the same as we looked when we were 20. There was a saying, I think this is, you're 20, you're hot, you're 40, you're not, and 60, you're shot. Which, that's a crazy thing. We're not shot at 60.
No.
But that's what the culture is trying to tell us, that you're just done by a certain age because you don't have this one particular look. And it's such a lie, and it's such a myth, and it's used to get us to think that we're not going to be used anymore.
Do you think that parents can actually be the source of some of their children's insecurities by excessing on what they look like and, comparing them to one another and,
Constant.
maybe even forcing them to be on diets too
Yes.
early. A situation I'm thinking about, which sounds a little far out, but there was a woman who used to come to my meetings that she'd had a lot of weight issues in her life, and she pretty much had them under control at that point, but she was still real fixated on
Yeah.
it. And she had a baby, and, like most babies, the baby had little chubby legs. And she actually came one day and asked me to pray for her because she said, I actually have been exercising my baby's
Oh, my.
legs
Yeah, babies are
because
supposed to
I
have chubby
so
legs.
much don't want her to have the problems that I had
Yeah.
with my weight. And so
Wow.
I think sometimes even when we've suffered in an area, I know I was always a little bit of a chubby teenager and got teased and never felt like I was quite, as attractive as a lot of the other girls. And, I had to be really careful that I wasn't, saying things to my kids because I so much didn't want them to get teased.
Yeah.
And so what about that?
Is it based on fear? What you're talking
Yeah.
about is there's a fear that something's going to happen to them and then they're going to go through the same thing that you went through. The comments that mothers and fathers make about their own bodies in front of kids.
Yes.
If you're constantly saying, oh, and we do it unconsciously. We're just in the car, you're saying something about, oh, these pants feel tight, I need to lose 5 pounds. Kids are constantly hearing those things that you're saying about your body, and it's really clear that you pass that on generationally. So if you're obsessing on what you're eating, what you're wearing, how you're feeling in your own skin, and you're saying those things in front of your own daughters and sons, you're going to pass those same kind of insecurities on. So we have to be careful that we're not doing that and knowing what's normal. It's normal for babies to have chubby skins. It's normal for aging women to have some skin that goes down and things to kind of fall a little bit more from where they were. That's normal. That's not a disease.
Yeah.
That's just the way we're made. And you can try to defy it for a long time, but there's going to be a point where aging is going to catch up with you and it's going to show. And it's
Yeah.
okay
Yeah.
to be looking that same way. There's maturity that comes with aging. There's other kinds of things that we have to focus on. It's not all about the body. There's other wisdom that we get with aging.
Right.
Maturity is something we have to work on. It's not just something that happens. But there's spiritual growth and insight and wisdom and all these other things. So when the culture pulls us and says it's only about how you look, and we get afraid because that's a fading thing. That's not something that's going to stay with us for the rest of our life. Then we get frightened and we begin to think that, somehow we're going to lose who we are if we lose a certain kind of look. It's very scary. So parents have to be very careful, like we were saying, about what they're saying about their own bodies and what they're saying to their kids. I've got a neighbor, Joyce, who I love dearly, and she caught herself constantly telling her daughter, don't eat that, don't have that, don't eat that candy, and constantly setting up this deprivation thing, which we know from research, if you constantly are depriving yourself, you're going to want it all the more.
Yeah.
So it doesn't work that way with food, and she had to catch herself, and I had to keep saying to her, you got to be careful what you say because you're talking to your daughter constantly about losing weight.
Yeah.
And she said exactly what you say. All my life, I was teased for that. And my mother said those things to me, and it became a huge issue. I don't want her to feel the pain that I felt. That's not the way to go about it.
That's true.
The way to go about it is to teach your daughter where her true confidence and her excitement about who she is comes from, her identity, which is in Christ.
Well, we're going to take another short break. Stay with us. We'll be right back.